I've worked in corporate long enough to know one thing. People rarely show their true colors in meetings, but they always reveal them when they think no one is watching. My moment came on a Tuesday morning, an ordinary, boring, slightly chilly morning, when I walked into the office with a folder that had the power to save the company. I didn't know that within the next 3 hours, I would be escorted out of the building like a criminal, or that the VP who ordered it would accidentally cost the company $150 million. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. What I didn't know was that our CEO, Daniel Foster, trusted me. I'd been a senior risk analyst for almost 6 years, and if there was one thing I was good at, it was spotting trouble before it exploded. And trouble was exactly what I found buried in our insurance compliance logs, trouble big enough to sink the company if I didn't fix it in time. But that morning, a man who'd been with the company for exactly 9 days decided he knew better than me. His name was Evan Turner, our shiny new vice president of operations.
Young, loud.
The kind of guy who mispronounces your name, but still lectures you about team synergy. A man who thought power meant talking the loudest. I walked into the executive floor carrying the documents the CEO needed before our $120 million funding meeting that afternoon. The investors' legal team had sent over updated terms hours earlier, and buried in those terms was an insurance clause we weren't compliant with, meaning the deal could fall apart. Insurance covenants don't care about excuses. They care about signatures, certifications, and airtight logs. I had all of it fixed. I just needed the CEO's sign-off. But Evan was standing outside the conference room like he owned the entire building. When he saw me walking toward him with a folder, his smirk tightened. "And where do you think you're going?" he asked. "To give Daniel the compliance documents he asked for," I said. He laughed. Actually laughed.
Loud.
Echoing. Mocking. "Daniel doesn't ask analysts for documents directly anymore," he said, shaking his head like I was a confused child. "You run these through me now." "That's not the protocol," I replied calmly. "This is time-sensitive." Evan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You analysts think you know so much. You don't. This level isn't for you anymore." I tried to keep my composure. "Evan, the meeting is today. The investors are flying in. The insurance clause." He cut me off with a wave of his hand, as if brushing away dust. "Grace, darling, you're not needed here." And then, with a sarcastic half-smile, "I'll have you escorted out if you don't leave." At first, I thought he was bluffing. Executives don't just say things like that, and mean them. Not in front of employees. Not in a Fortune 500 company. But he wasn't bluffing. Within 5 minutes, building security showed up. The guard looked embarrassed. "Grace,
I'm sorry."
VP's orders." I stared at Evan. "You're making a mistake," I told him. He shrugged, enjoying the power trip. "I don't think so." Security didn't handcuff me or anything dramatic. They just walked with me down the hallway, past coworkers pretending not to look, past assistants whispering behind their screens, past the HR manager who looked like she wanted to sink into the carpet. Everyone knew I'd just been humiliated. Everyone except Evan knew the real consequences. Because those documents, the ones Evan blocked me from delivering, they were required to maintain our insurance compliance status, meaning that without them, our insurance covenant with the investors automatically voided. Meaning, no insurance compliance equals no $120 million funding. That money wasn't optional. It was lifeline level necessary. We'd been planning expansions, hiring, product launches. Without the funding, everything would crash. But Evan was too proud, too arrogant, and too eager to establish dominance to care about the paperwork he didn't understand. 2 hours later, the investors arrived. Their lead attorney, a sharp, stone-faced woman named Melissa Hart, reviewed the final compliance logs before the deal signing. She spotted the issue instantly. She asked the CEO, "Where is the updated certification package?" Daniel flipped through the documents, confused. "Grace emailed me saying she'd bring it up this morning." Melissa didn't respond. She simply turned to the security log tablet, typed a few keys, and slid it silently across the table toward him. Right there in black and white. "Grace Miller, escorted out, ordered by VP Evan Turner." Daniel's face went pale. He looked at Evan, then leaned toward him and whispered, quiet, controlled, deadly. You just voided our insurance covenant. And the room fell silent. Silent in the way only million-dollar mistakes can make a room go silent. And that's where my revenge story begins. Because when a man with unchecked ego tries to ruin your career, sometimes the only thing you need to destroy his is the truth. If there's one thing I've learned in corporate America, it's this. Titles don't make leaders, pressure does. And pressure was squeezing the executive conference room so tightly that even the walls felt like they were listening. Daniel, our CEO, wasn't the type to raise his voice. He didn't need to. His disappointment alone felt like a punishment. And right then, he was looking at Evan with the kind of expression most people reserve for funerals. But I wasn't there to witness any of it, not physically anyway. I was sitting in my car in the parking structure, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to convince myself I hadn't just lost my job over a man's ego trip. My work badge was still warm from where security had taken it. I checked my email obsessively, expecting a termination notice. But instead, I saw something else. 3 missed calls from Daniel, 2 messages from legal, 1 urgent text from my coworker, Jenna. Grace, something's happening. Do not leave. Stay close. I had no idea what that meant, but something inside me told me to wait. Meanwhile, inside the conference room, the investors were not impressed. Melissa, the attorney, had the kind of calm that was scarier than yelling. She tapped the insurance clause on the contract with 1 manicured nail. Your compliance files are incomplete, she said. That means your insurance covenant is void as of 9:17 a.m. Evan tried to laugh it off. We can get the paperwork from someone. It's not a big deal. But Melissa didn't blink. Your analyst, Grace Miller, attempted to deliver the documents. Instead, she was escorted out. She slid the security log back to Daniel. This is not a clerical issue. This is internal mismanagement. Daniel's jaw tightened. Grace never makes mistakes, he said quietly. If she said it was urgent, it was urgent. Evan rolled his eyes. With all due respect, she's an analyst. Analysts don't understand the urgency of executive-level decision-making. Melissa stared at him like he was a talking stapler. Your analyst understood enough to catch a clause our own legal team highlighted yesterday. She understood enough to bring it directly to the CEO. You dismissed her. That's what voided your compliance. Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. Can the covenant be restored if we produce the documents now? Melissa hesitated. Theoretically, yes. But only if I recertify the chain of custody. I would need Grace here. Evan snorted. She doesn't work here anymore. Daniel looked at him sharply. Who said that? She was insubordinate, Evan said. I ordered her escorted out. You ordered a senior risk analyst to be escorted out? Daniel asked, voice low and dangerous. Evan shrugged, shrugging like the consequences didn't matter. Protocol is protocol. Melissa leaned forward. Actually, Mr. Turner, protocol states that compliance documentation supersedes executive authority during an active funding review period. Evan blinked. What does that mean? It means, she said, you violated the single policy you should have memorized on your first day. In the parking garage, I still had no idea any of this was happening. I was sitting in my car replaying Evan's laugh in my head, the way he'd waved his hand like I was nothing. The humiliation burned worse than anger usually does. I wasn't angry that he didn't respect me. I was angry that he didn't respect the work. And worse, he didn't respect the stakes. My phone buzzed again, another text from Jenna. Grace, Daniel is furious. They need you. Come to the lobby now. My heart pounded. Furious? Need me? I climbed out of my car, still shaky, still unsure whether I was walking back into a job or a firing squad. Security saw me approach and exchanged looks. One of them, Robert, stepped forward. Grace, we were told to bring you up immediately. By who? Daniel himself. Those were the last 3 words I expected to hear. When I stepped off the elevator on the executive floor, the atmosphere felt electric, tense, urgent, heavy. Assistants were whispering. Phones were ringing. Someone from HR was pacing with a clipboard. And then Daniel came out of the conference room. He looked tired,
Angry.
determined. Grace, he said, walking straight toward me. I need those documents.
Now.
I held up the folder. I still have them. His shoulders dropped in relief.
Good. Come with me.
We walked into the conference room together. The investors turned. Melissa nodded. Evan looked like he'd swallowed a thumbtack. I placed the documents on the table, flipping them open to the corrected section, showing the updated insurance certifications, the compliance signatures, the time-stamped logs I'd prepared overnight. Melissa reviewed everything silently, page by page. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, she closed the folder. Compliance is restored, she said. You may proceed with the funding presentation. Daniel exhaled. The room relaxed. Everyone except Evan. He stood there, pale, sweaty, silent. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. Because I knew the truth. His career wasn't about to be damaged. It was about to be detonated. And nobody even knew yet that I had the evidence to finish the job. When the compliance was restored, the room breathed again, but relief and danger share the same air. The investors left reassured, contracts reopened, and for a moment it felt like I had dodged a bullet. Then Evan did something I should have expected. He tried to make the bullet my responsibility. 2 days later, I was called into HR. The email subject line read like a funeral announcement. Mandatory meeting, personnel review. My palms went cold on the elevator ride up. I'd handed the documents to Daniel in front of the investors. Melissa had recertified the chain of custody. There was no legitimate reason to summon me except one. Evan had friends, and politics in that building were a hungry animal. In the HR office, Karen, our director, sat like a judge. Evan arrived 5 minutes late, smiling the way someone smiles before cutting a cake. Beside him sat our head of security, Robert, and our legal counsel. Daniel was not there. That absence mattered. Grace, Karen began, the corporate script loading. We've received a formal complaint regarding your conduct on Tuesday morning. Evan leaned forward. She insisted on bypassing chain of command. She created a scene. I followed protocol and requested that security escort her from premises because her behavior was disruptive. I stand by my actions. It was thin. He made it sound like a temper tantrum. He used the phrase disruptive behavior like a weapon, like if you say it enough in the right rooms, it becomes law. I felt the room tilt. My voice came out steady despite the adrenaline. I followed company policy for compliance materials. I informed leadership and was bringing the documents to the CEO. There is an email trail. Karen took notes. Robert looked uncomfortable. Legal kept his face neutral. Mr. Turner, our counsel said, we need to review the security log and email chain. Evans smiled. Please do. It will show I acted appropriately. The meeting ended without a resolution, but the implication hung in the air like a debt notice. We're investigating you, Grace. Investigations in corporate life are quiet death sentences. For a week, I watched my inbox with the kind of obsessiveness normally reserved for genuine emergencies. Colleagues avoided eye contact. Someone changed the way they said my name in the hallway, softly, like it might sound different if less direct. Then the smear campaign started small and careful. A manager who'd never had anything against me suddenly mentioned, at a team lunch, how complicated workplace dynamics were and how calm leadership was essential. A Slack message got forwarded to my team implying that procedural adherence was our highest value. Someone in middle management made a joke about analysts rocking the boat. The poison was surgical. Nobody outright attacked me, but everyone got a little colder. What shocked me was how quickly a room full of competent adults could turn into bystanders. I'd spent 6 years building a reputation, and it felt like a candle being snuffed by a man with an ego and friends. But Evan had made one critical miscalculation. He'd left a trail. Remember the security tablet Melissa had slid across the table? It archived not only the event, but also who authorized it, and when. And it synced with our internal communication logs. On top of that, the legal team had already pulled metadata on emails and messages as part of the investor review, Those metadata couldn't be faked without leaving forensics all over the server. So while the rumor mill worked the surface, I quietly compiled everything I had. I copied emails showing I'd flagged the clause days before. I saved timestamp drafts and the server logs proving Melissa had requested the recertification only after my attempted delivery. I had screenshots, awkward, ugly things, of Evan's chat messages to a junior employee asking them to keep the analyst out of things, and a calendar entry where Evan had blocked my access to the executive floor during the critical hour. I also found something worse for Evan hidden in plain sight. He'd used his executive badge to approve the escort order. The security badge ID was linked to his account and showed the exact timestamp, 9 minutes before the investor's lawyer checked the logs. It was a smoking gun. But even with evidence, the fight didn't become simple. Evidence in corporate politics only matters if it's delivered at the right time and by the right people. So I did something that made my hands shake when I hit send. I forwarded the entire package, security logs, email metadata, chat transcripts, calendar entries, to Daniel, Melissa, and legal. I wrote a short, unemotional note. These are the items I have that show the timeline of events from Monday through Tuesday. I believe they demonstrate that the escort order was issued by Mr. Turner before the investor's final review. I am available to discuss at any time. I pressed send and felt like I'd stepped off a cliff. The response was immediate and oddly cold. Daniel called me into his office that afternoon. He sat behind his desk with the same calm that had once been relief. This time it held a hard edge. "Grace," he said, "this is a big accusation." "It's proof," I said. "I'm not accusing. I'm handing you the logs." He looked at me for a long moment. "If this is true, you understand what it means for Evan." "I do," I replied. "And I understand what it could mean for me if it's not handled correctly." He nodded. That acknowledgement was both a comfort and a threat. Corporate leaders rarely take the easy moral path, but if they do, they call it business judgment. Over the next week, the conflict escalated into a full-blown internal arbitration. Evan's supporters claimed he was protecting executive processes. HR wanted to mediate. The legal team booked time with outside counsel. Investors demanded transparency. The company's board scheduled an emergency review. I became both evidence and accused. The media of the office, emails, whispers, forwarded messages, turned me into a story about internal disruption. Some people asked me if I'd considered leaving. Others asked if I regretted speaking up. Emotionally, the week was a roller coaster. Shame when I heard coworkers gossip, fury when I thought of Evan's smug face, fear that this would end my career. At night, I replayed his laugh, trying to map where my dignity had been sliced. But under all that, a cold determination grew. If I had the proof, I wouldn't let a title rewrite reality. And I wasn't alone. Melissa reached out privately and said 3 words that shifted everything. "I believe you." When an outside counsel from the investor's side said it, the room's balance changed. Suddenly, the fight had more than my quiet stubbornness behind it. It had the weight of external witnesses and legal teeth. Evan's smirk tightened into a line. He realized his mistake. Ego had led him to use power recklessly, and power, when used like that, leaves fingerprints. The arbitration was set. The board would meet. The legal folks would parse the logs. It was about to get very public. The boardroom for the arbitration hearing looked nothing like the friendly conference space where we usually held all-hands meetings. This room was cold, wide, and too quiet, like the kind of place where careers were not discussed but executed. I walked in with a folder pressed against my chest, not because I needed to. The board already had copies, but because holding it grounded me. Across the long table sat the people who would decide not just whether I kept my job, but whether Evan's reckless decision would be exposed or quietly swept under the corporate rug. Evan sat at the far end, flanked by 2 attorneys. He was pale but trying to project confidence, wearing the same forced smile he'd worn during his welcome week. He kept tapping a pen against the table, and every tap said the same thing. "I'm nervous." I didn't expect it to get this far. Daniel sat near the center. His expression was thunder. He wasn't angry at me, he'd made that clear, but He was furious that a mistake this preventable had reached the board level. His reputation, too, was on the line. The board chair, a sharp woman named Linda Warren, opened the meeting. "We're here to review the events surrounding the investor funding meeting, the compliance lapse, and the conflicting accounts of the incident involving Ms. Miller and Mr. Turner." Her tone was crisp, sterile, perfect. She could have been announcing a weather advisory. "We will begin with the logs." I felt my pulse in my throat. The projector screen lit up, and the first image appeared, the security system's access timestamp. It showed Evan's executive badge authorizing the escort order. Evan shifted in his seat. One of his lawyers straightened. "Madam Chair, the badge proves only that Mr. Turner authorized security protocol. It does not establish intent or context." Linda nodded. "We will examine context next." Slide 2 appeared. My email to Daniel, sent late the night before, flagging the insurance clause. Slide 3. The server log showing that the documents were finalized at 7:42 a.m. with my ID, then downloaded by me at 8:01 a.m. Slide 4. The internal message between Evan and a junior employee, where he wrote, "Keep her out until after the meeting. Compliance isn't her lane." A ripple went through the room. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough for everyone to shift in their seats. Daniel leaned forward. I was unaware of that message. The investor's attorney, Melissa, was attending remotely on a large screen. She adjusted her glasses. "This message is extremely concerning," she said. "It establishes that Mr. Turner intentionally blocked the delivery of compliance documents during active due diligence. Our funding was contingent upon those documents." Evan's lawyer interjected again. "We question the authenticity of that screenshot." Melissa didn't blink. "Check the server metadata." We already did. Slide 5 came up. The metadata. Time-stamped. Authenticated. Evan stopped tapping his pen. Linda folded her hands. "Mr. Turner, would you like to explain?" He swallowed. "It was a miscommunication. I thought she was interfering. I thought." "You didn't ask," Linda cut in. "I didn't think an analyst." The room froze. Even his lawyer winced. Melissa spoke sharply. "Your analyst prevented a $120 million deal from collapsing. Her understanding surpassed yours." Evan flushed a violent red. Then came the most damning slide. The Compliance Policy Manual, highlighted to show that during active funding review, analysts are authorized to bypass the chain of command if compliance risk is present. Evan shut his eyes. His entire justification evaporated. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in weeks. Vindication. Then Linda turned to me. "Ms. Miller, you were escorted out. Describe the interaction." I kept my voice calm. "I told Mr. Turner that the documents were time-sensitive. He dismissed me. He said analysts were no longer allowed on the executive floor. When I insisted that the CEO had asked for the documents directly, he threatened to have me removed. A few minutes later, security arrived." Linda took notes. "And you had no prior disciplinary issues?" "None," I said. "In 6 years." Daniel confirmed it. "Grace has an exemplary record." The board exchanged looks. Then Evan's team went on the offensive. His lawyer stood. "Ms. Miller, are you aware that your behavior that morning was reported as confrontational?" "Yes," I replied. "By Mr. Turner." "Is it possible you misunderstood his direction?"
No.
"Is it possible that you escalated the situation?" "I followed compliance protocol."
He didn't.
My voice was steady. Each answer felt like reclaiming a part of myself. Then Linda asked the question that mattered most. "Mr. Turner, did you understand that escorting Ms. Miller out of the building would void our insurance covenant?" He hesitated. Everyone noticed. "I didn't know the documents were that urgent," he said finally. Melissa's voice sharpened through the speaker. "You were informed the night before that updated insurance documents were required before the meeting. You acknowledged the email. I have the read receipt." Slide 6 appeared. Evan had opened the email. He had read it. He ignored it. A cold silence filled the room. Then Daniel spoke quietly, the kind of quiet that cuts deeper than shouting. You cost this company 3 days of legal scrambling, a risk of losing $120 million in funding, and you tried to punish the only person who followed policy. You humiliated her, and you jeopardized all of us. Evans stared at the table. Linda leaned back in her chair. We have heard enough. A board vote was called. It took less than a minute. When Linda announced the decision, Evans' illusion of power shattered. He was terminated effective immediately. His escort this time wasn't symbolic. Security actually came for him. His badge was disabled on the spot. He left without looking at me, without speaking, without a shred of the arrogance he once walked the floor with. For a moment, I thought that was the end. But it wasn't. Because there was still the question of my reputation, my career, and what the company planned to do to make this right. And that would be decided next. When the boardroom cleared and the echo of the gavel faded, I walked out feeling oddly hollow. Victory had a hollow center. Evan was gone. The funding was back on track. The investors had their signatures ready. But none of that erased the sting of being humiliated in front of colleagues, the quiet weeks of gossip, or the sleepless nights wondering whether speaking up would cost me everything. Daniel caught up with me in the hallway. He had that look again, resolved, apologetic, tired. Grace, he said, I'm sorry this happened on my watch. He meant it, and you could hear the cost in his voice. He offered me a seat in his office, and we talked for a long time about accountability, about policy, about what went wrong. He asked me what I wanted. For a moment, I didn't know. I wanted the humiliation to unhappen. I wanted every awkward whisper to dissolve. I wanted my coworkers to look at me like they used to. Instead, I asked for something more practical, a formal apology distributed company-wide, a review and rewrite of how compliance materials were handled during funding events, and a small but meaningful gesture, sponsorship for a leadership training program, so I could mentor junior analysts on navigating political landmines. Daniel agreed to all of it. He announced a company-wide meeting that afternoon. I stood in the back of the auditorium and listened as he outlined the changes. New compliance escalation protocols, mandatory training on chain of custody procedures for executives, and a pledge to improve internal communication. He acknowledged the mistake publicly, his voice steady, the apology crisp and devoid of corporate doublespeak. I watched people in the room turn their heads, finally seeing me not as a problematic employee, but as the one who'd saved an entire funding round. The investors followed through. They signed the term sheet that week, with Melissa personally thanking me in an email that still makes my chest warm when I think of it. Your diligence saved the deal. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. That message meant more than the money. It was a public validation from the people who mattered in that room when it counted. Evan, meanwhile, tried to scrub his name from the narrative. He filed grievance claims, hired lawyers, and tried to court sympathetic ears outside the company. But the trail was too clean. The logs were clear. The messages were authentic. The board had acted based on documented evidence, and in business, documentation tends to outlive excuses. There was a small moment of poetry in all of this. A week after the arbitration, the company held an internal town hall. A junior analyst named Tom, someone I barely knew, came to the mic and said, I saw what happened, and I want to say thank you. Not just for the funding, but for standing up when it mattered. He talked about how afraid he'd been to speak up in the past, and how seeing me stand firm made him rethink his own silence. That single sentence was the turning point for me. Proof that the personal cost I'd borne had ripple effects I couldn't have planned. The more practical outcomes followed. HR updated its escalation policies. Executives attended mandatory empathy and compliance training. The security team changed how escort orders were authorized, adding a mandatory secondary verification during sensitive periods. Investors insisted on quarterly compliance checks going forward. I was offered a promotion to lead a small compliance task force. It wasn't about prestige for me. It was about making sure no one else got shoved out of the room because someone else wanted to flex. Emotionally, healing was a slower arc. I still had days where I replayed Evan's laugh, where old insecurities crawled back in. But I learned to quiet them with evidence and action. I wrote a short op-ed for an industry newsletter about the importance of procedural respect and the dangers of ego-driven decisions. It was personal but professional. exact but human. The piece gained traction and led to a few calls from other firms asking for my input on similar policy gaps. I never wanted to be a poster child for corporate injustice, but if my story helped one other company avoid the same mistake, it was worth the discomfort. And what of Evan? He surfaced briefly in the trade press as an example of an executive who rose too fast and fell faster. He hopped to a couple of small startups, but the same arrogance that had been his undoing followed him. At one point, he tried to reach out, claiming he was sorry, an email with too many qualifiers and not enough ownership. I didn't reply. There's a piece that comes from letting karma do its soft work. You don't have to chase closure if reality hands it to you. Months later, the funding translated into actual work, new hires, product rollouts, and a team that began to trust the systems in place. I mentored 3 analysts personally, teaching them how to document, how to escalate, and how to hold their ground professionally. Watching them grow felt like stitching a wound. People ask me if I regret the fight, if the stress was worth the outcome. My answer is always the same. I regret the humiliation and the anxiety, but I don't regret standing up. Standing up preserved more than my job. It preserved the integrity of the process we all relied on. It also reshaped a company culture in a quiet, structural way, and that kind of change is rare. If there's a lesson in this, it's not the classic don't pick fights with your superiors. It's simpler and harder. Know your work, document it, and protect it. Power can be loud and blinding, but evidence is persistent and unglamorous. It doesn't need drama. It just needs to be true. On a personal note, the most surprising part of the aftermath was the conversations that followed. Colleagues I thought had been complicit in the whispers apologized in private. Some explained they were scared. Others said they admired my stubbornness. The truth is, people often choose safety over standing because the systems reward silence. Shifting that takes time, and sometimes one stubborn person willing to be uncomfortable. Standing outside the building the day the investors left with their suitcases and a signed agreement felt full circle. I'd been escorted out once in a moment of power play. But this time, I walked out on my own terms, head up, folder in hand, knowing that I hadn't just protected a fund. I'd made it a little harder for arrogance to hide behind titles. And if that's the only kind of revenge that matters to me, one that returns respect to work and dignity to the people who do it, then I'll take it.